episode of Cosmic Conversations. I am your host, Marla Martenson, and today I am with Tracey Rollin, who is the author of, hey Tracey, of this really magical book called Santa Muerte, The History, Rituals, and Magic of Our Lady of Holy Death. Of the Holy Death. So, welcome to Cosmic Conversations. I'm so excited. And you guys, I have my own Santa Muerte right here, which will be going to a friend later because my hubby's not happy about me having this in the house. So we're going to get into that, why he might be scared of it or not want that. You know, he's from Mexico. And so Tracey, tell us, let's dive in. I'm so excited about this subject. So you grew up Catholic and were taught to pray with your rosary to the saints and all that. And tell us a little bit about your history and how you got into Santa Muerte, and then we'll talk about what it is.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much first for inviting me onto your show. I'm really, really excited. I'd love to tell you about how I got into Santa Muerte. My path into working with her is a little unusual for some people. Like you just mentioned, I was raised Catholic. My mother is actually a German immigrant. She immigrated to the United States in late 1960s. Didn't work out with her first husband. She wound up marrying my father, and I came along. So my mother was raised a very devout Catholic, and as a result, when I was a little girl, I went to Mass 3 times a week. I went to Catholic education. I was taught by the nuns. I mean, I remember when I was a little girl, I used to have to collect novena cards of, like, saints, for example, you know. Almost, my dad used to call them Catholic baseball cards. I had so many of these things, you know. So I was raised very much Catholic, and it kind of fell out for me when I was in my early teens. I was actually a pretty devout child, and unfortunately, I found out that I couldn't be a priest because I'm a female. And I really wanted to be involved in that kind of pageantry and start, you know, leading people in terms of spirituality, exploring my own spirituality, sharing it with other people. And that just didn't really seem to be something that was available to me if I followed the Catholic path, which, of course, then I found myself falling out of Catholicism. But those are really still my roots. New Mexico is a heavily Catholic state. A couple of years ago, about 10 years ago now at this point, I went to the grocery store to go buy some regular ritual candles, you know, just like regular blue ones or yellow ones, just 7-day candles. And because New Mexico is a very Hispanic state, there's a lot of saints candles as well. It's very popular in Hispanic culture, Catholics in general, but to go and pray to saints and having special marked printed candles. And I went to the grocery store one day and I found an entire shelf dedicated to Santa Muerte. And I had no idea who she was. And I'd grown up in this state. So I picked up a white candle, took it home, because I figured you couldn't go wrong with a white candle, right? I took out my old rosary from when I was a kid, and I challenged her to appear to me or to show me that she was even real, you know? And I left it at that. A couple days later, I have a friend, she likes going to garage sales and buying other people's junk. Yeah. She comes to my house, and she had a whole bunch of Halloween supplies available. And she gave me a box, and had, you know, rubber bats and spiders and that kind of thing in it. And I dug to the bottom of the box, and what do I find? 3 days later, a Santa Muerte statue.
Wow. That's amazing.
Right. So, you know, if you keep on, you know, asking her for things and she keeps responding, you're going to keep working with her, aren't you?
Yeah.
And here we are 10 years later. So that's how that started.
Well, tell us a little bit about the history of Santa Muerte. I know in your book you talk about they're not quite sure if it came over from Spain or if it's from the indigenous people in Mexico.
Sure, absolutely. Santa Muerte is generally thought to have one of 2 roots. Either she comes from Mexico, where she's actually rooted in an ancient Aztec goddess named Mictecacecihuatl, who is a very... Unfortunately, we don't know a lot about Mictecacecihuatl because the Catholics the Spanish wound up burning about 95% of the Aztec libraries. But from what the remaining information that we do have, we can glean that she was a very dominant goddess and probably one of the principal goddesses worshipped during what would wind up becoming the Day of the Dead Festival, which we still worship today, which is why Santa Muerte is the patron saint of the Day of the Dead Festival, because she's thought to be associated with this ancient Aztec death goddess. The other place that she might be associated with, that most people think she's associated with, would actually be from Spain. You see, the Grim Reaper in European myth has always really been an ancient woman. I mean, like, if you go back to the 3 fates, who did you have? You had the one that wove the thread of life, you had the one who measured the thread of life, and then you had the old lady, Atropos, who cut the thread of life, right? And even when the Romans adopted that from the Greeks, they renamed her to Parca Morta, the fate of death, which is where today we even get words like mortal and mortuary and things like that. So the idea of a feminine death, a feminine Grim Reaper, is actually deeply embedded in Western European culture, and seemed to come to an emergence after the Black Death, especially when the European culture, because of, well, widespread death because of the plague, wound up turning to ideas and themes of death and resurrection and renewal and that sort of thing, which is where the idea of a friendly and feminine form of the Grim Reaper became very, very popular. And so this idea of death already being a woman came forward again. And so we get this Grim Reaperess, as Andrew Chestnut in his book Devoted to Death likes to refer to her figure, which we think also evolved into Santa Muerte.
Mm-hmm. So when did, I know now it's growing rapidly in Mexico and other places, right? Did you say it was one of the most rapidly growing religions or cults or practices?
That's a quote from Andrew Chestnut from one of his own interviews, where he calls it one of the newest, one of the fastest growing new religious movements in the world today. To kind of give you a idea of exactly how big the current cult of Santa Muerte is, if you would, there's about 10 to 12 million devotees of hers worldwide right now. There's 15.8 million members of the Mormon Church. So it's almost as big as the Mormon Church.
Wow.
Santa Muerte has been popularized, especially by the media and news media, being associated with the drug cartels. Sometimes you'll see, especially out here in New Mexico, you'll see stories about Santa Muerte statues being left at the roadside or graveyards, perhaps, as part of some kind of curse to demoralize or perhaps, cause a car accident or something of that nature. Santa Muerte is popularly known to be the patron saint of anyone who lives on the fringes of society, which by definition does include criminals, because they're criminals, basically, right?
Right.
But that's not only just criminals. It can be people who work at night, for example, like bartenders, taxi drivers, late night cleaning and maintenance staff, nurses. I'm a registered nurse. I'm an ER nurse, for heaven's sakes. I work nights, and I see stuff that you shouldn't ever have to see just because I work nights and I work weekends. I'm in the middle of it all.
Right.
Santa Muerte is the patron saint of all of these people, and she actually opens her arms to anyone who wants to follow her. And the reason why she does this is she is the embodiment of death taken a feminine form. Everyone's going to die.
Yeah.
Okay. If you go back to the imagery the dance macabre, back to that bubonic plague in the 13th and 14th century that I was talking about, that was something that was actually very much a central theme of a lot of the art and literature and music and poetry at the time, is it didn't matter if you were a king or a beggar, death was going to come for you one way or another. Death being the great equalizer, that's one of the things that's so appealing about Santa Muerte. Some people would say that Mexican society is somewhat stratified into a very much have and have not kind of thing. I mean, you're either very rich and well connected and part of the Catholic Church, or you're very much not any of those kinds of people. And if you don't have connections, if you don't have any supernatural friends, if you don't feel as if anyone or anything is on your side, you're going to turn to that which is going to help you. And if that happens to be the power of death, well, a lot of people feel they may not have much of a choice.
Well, I know in Mexico, the more poor people, they are, though, they're all Catholic, so they are very devout. But somehow, a lot of them have turned to Santa Muerte, and so it is interesting because the Virgin, the Virgin of Guadalupe, that is who everybody reveres in Mexico. And I've got a lot of her imagery here. I love it. My husband's from Mexico. I've spent a lot of time in Mexico. We go a lot. I've been maybe 16 times down there. And so I always buy myself a new something, Virgin, Guadalupe something. But I was just fascinated when I saw I think it was, there was a documentary about Santa Muerte that I saw last year. And I became fascinated with it and how fast it's growing. And so it's just interesting how they've just picked up on this, and now it's, going crazy. So what do you think that was? They have the Virgin of Guadalupe, they have the Catholicism, but why do you think then they're kind of switching over to Santa Muerte?
There is some conjecture that the Virgin of Guadalupe and Santa Muerte may actually be rooted in the same figure. If you go back to pre-Spanish Mexico, it was ruled by the Aztecs. And probably the crowning point of Aztec culture was their belief in sacrifice. Absolutely everything that they had, from food, clothing, shelter, medicine, knowledge of any kind had to have been taken in one form or another from the land and ultimately from the gods, okay? You don't eat without harvesting. You don't have fish without killing the fish. You certainly don't have clothes without killing the plant and weaving. So you're always in debt to the land, always in debt to the earth. So therefore, if you sacrificed back, you recognized this debt and you paid into this constant debt that you owed, and that was the reason why they sacrificed food, sacrificed clothing, sacrificed jewelry, sacrificed animals, and certainly famously sacrificed people to their gods. The reason why is because they felt that they owed this humongous debt. Because of this balance between the power of life and the power of death that had to be kept in constant tandem balance to each other, when they converted to Catholicism, this still remained a very strong element of their culture. I mean, it was incredibly deeply embedded. One of the goddesses that was strongly associated with the concepts of life and renewal and fertility and these sorts of things was an Aztec goddess named Penance. Right after the Spanish conquest, about 1523 or 1524 thereabouts, there was a Aztec peasant. His name was Juan Diego, and he was traveling over this one hill that was near this town, and he saw this lady appear in the middle of this hill. It was an Aztec princess, elaborately dressed, beautiful pink dress, beautiful woman. And she addresses him in his native language and says, "Juan Diego, I want you to build me a temple right here on this spot." And he looks at her because he thinks he's gone crazy and she's crazy and everything's crazy, so he runs away, okay? And he runs down to go tell the bishop this, and the bishop tells him that he's hallucinating. So, of course, he keeps on going over this hill, and this woman keeps appearing and demanding this temple be built. So, of course, what does Juan Diego do? He stops going over the hill. So one day, his best friend becomes sick and is deathly ill, like he's going to die, and Juan Diego has to go and visit him because his friend's about to die, and of course the fastest way to his friend's house is over this fateful hill. So he goes over this hill yet again. He hasn't been over it for about a month, and this lady reappears, and she's like, "Where's my temple at? I told you I need a temple right here." And he's like, "Lady, I don't know who you are. No one believes me. The bishop thinks I'm crazy, and I wish you would stop appearing to me." And she says, "Watch this. I will provide you a miracle." She snaps her fingers, and in the middle of January, the entire hilltop covered in roses. She tells him to go gather up all these roses. He goes and takes them down to the bishop. He goes and empties out his cloak because he's totally freaking out now at this point. And what's painted on the inside? It's the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe, of course. Okay, the very famous image on the inside.
I've seen the original in Mexico City.
Absolutely, the famously bomb-proof original in Mexico City. So they go and they build this, and they call it the Virgin of Guadalupe. However, that woman who appeared to him was an Aztec princess, spoke to him his native language, and if you examine the image, she looks exactly like Tenantzin, the Aztec mother goddess. And where does she want this temple to be built? On a destroyed site to the goddess Tenantzin. Okay, so there's a lot of people who think that Our Lady of Guadalupe is in fact actually the Aztec goddess Tenantzin, or an emanation of her.
Okay, yeah, because, well, she's believed to be the Virgin Mary, but...
Precisely.
So, yeah.
So if you had to have a strong balance between the goddess of life and the goddess of death, if you have the principal goddess of death, Mictacatzihuatl, the Virgin Mary is also associated as a form of a death goddess or a death concept. I mean, certainly she gave birth to Jesus, but she was also there when he was crucified. She was also one of the Marys that embalmed his body, and also one of the Marys who showed up at the tomb 3 days later and found out that he wasn't there, and the angel said, "He hath arisen into heaven." So in a way that not only was the Virgin Mary the mother of Jesus in life, he was also the mother of Jesus in death as well. Right. So if you already have this setup where you have Tenantzin set up as the Virgin Mary, it is very easy to have an anti-Virgin Mary or a dark Virgin Mary or even a skeletal Virgin Mary like Santa Muerte set up in the role of Mictacatzihuatl. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very fascinating. I love that you know all the history of Juan Diego and the Virgin. So tell us a little bit about how you work with her. She likes to have her own altar. What do you do here? So let's say somebody wants to start working with her. You know, they can get your book, and they can, you know, start off with one of these little statues.
Absolutely.
You can get them maybe at an occult shop or online. And then what do you do, and what can she do for you?
Absolutely. A Santa Muerte altar doesn't need to be as elaborate as the one behind me. I've been working with Santa Muerte for about 10 years, and this is the result. All you really need to start working with Santa Muerte are three things. An image of Santa Muerte, just like the statue that you held up, or even if you're short on cash, you can just print one off the internet. It's okay. You also need some water, so she has something to drink. Water is a very common refreshment for spirits, especially spirits of the dead. After they have gone and made their long journey up from the underworld to come visit you, it's customary to give your guest a refreshment, so water. And fire, in one form or another, certainly candles, is probably one of the most ancient ways of communicating with spirits basically ever. I mean, we've been making stone lamps and using them in ritual settings for like 200,000 years or thereabouts. So about possibly the most classic way of dealing with the spirit, because if you do work with Santa Muerte, you can view it as a form of spirit-assisted, or some would even say shamanic magic or witchcraft. So building a strong relationship with Santa Muerte is the key, which is why you'd have to have an altar set up. Any kind of altar, small altar is totally fine. I've seen altars that completely work that you can balance on a paper plate, so they don't have to be big or elaborate, but you do have to have a basic image of her like any other spirit altar that you would set up, and a candle and a glass of water.
Okay. And then you put flowers. Now, do you put some food too, or anything like that? Any cookies or anything, or chocolate?
Absolutely, absolutely. You can often give Santa Muerte a gift in terms after she does something for you. It's actually very customary in any kind of spirit-assisted magic, and certainly with Santa Muerte, that if you ask the spirit to do something and they do something for you, that you give them a payment back. Santa Muerte, let me dispel one myth here real quick. I've heard some people tell me, I've certainly had people ask me that if you work with Santa Muerte, she'll want an actual sacrifice, like you have to kill an animal or a person or something like that. That is absolutely not true. Okay, absolutely not true. I have given Santa Muerte chocolate, I have given her candy, I have made her taco dinners, I have given her lots of tequila, I have never shed a single drop of blood to work with Santa Muerte, period. Okay, so that's absolutely not true. Don't even go there. It is very common, like I said, to give Santa Muerte gifts after she's been working with you. I will go ahead and, at the very least, refresh her water and her alcohol once a day when I come in the morning. I literally get up in the morning, I'll go make myself a cup of coffee, come in here with my cup of coffee, give her a glass of water and some tequila, have a conversation with her, and walk out. It's like,
wow, she is real Mexican, loves her tequila.
You know it. Well, it's not like it's going to kill her. Cigarettes, coffee, chocolate, alcohol. She can indulge all she wants. It's not going to give her any problems.
That's true.
Right?
So what are some of the things that you've asked for or manifested with her, or that someone might want to, or that you have?
One of my favorite stories to tell about Santa Muerte, it has to do with my brother's truck. My brother was a commercial electrician, and he had a very large, very expensive work truck. You've seen folks driving up and down the road with these, like the box ends, all the tools, all these kinds of things, right? He wakes up one morning to discover that his truck was stolen out of the driveway. And he calls me in a panic because certainly he could file an insurance claim, but that was going to take at least a month and a half to get resolved. And he needed to get to the work site today. Okay, he can't be out of work for 6 weeks, and he certainly can't take his wife's car loaded up with tools and drive off in the boonies to go to his work. So he was in a panic, of course, and asked me if I could do anything. So I went to the green aspect of Santa Muerte. There are 7 different aspects of Santa Muerte, 7 different colors, and each one is associated with a different kind of portfolio or type of thing that she does or she handles.
Yeah, and they're all explained in here, you guys, so if you want to do it, it's
absolutely. Absolutely. The green one is associated with justice, and because his truck had been stolen, I figured that appealing to her would be a good start.
Yeah.
So I went down to the graveyard because it was a big request, so I decided to go down to her house, if you figure. And I started wandering around the graveyard to do my normal ritual. I brought some bottles of tequila and a couple roses and some chocolate and the usual offerings I like to bring her. And normally when I work at the graveyard, I will do it at certain crossroads. There's one graveyard that I favor. And when I got there, I felt that it was just the wrong place to be. I couldn't do it in the middle of the graveyard like I normally did. So I started wandering around looking for the right spot. And I saw that this one section of the graveyard just seemed like the best place. I didn't know why. I just liked it for some reason. So I went wandering over there, and I went behind just a certain grave that looked really good, and someone else had already been doing magic back there.
Wow.
There was already back there. There was already all different kinds of colored wax. There was already shells, seeds that had been dropped, money, coins. And I had no idea. It wasn't my work altar, but I figured if that's the local workstation, I'm going to go ahead and use it, right? So I go ahead and I put down my own candles, my own offerings, and I say my own prayers. I usually do a totally pagan-style rosary of Santa Muerte. And then I went around to the front of the grave to go ahead and take a picture of it because I was going to take it back to my ancestral altar and thank that spirit because I was basically using his house kind of, for my stuff. So the guy had died recently, so I went and I looked up his obituary online. I told you that my brother was a commercial electrician, a contractor. This guy had died recently, and he was a plumbing contractor.
Wow.
So right in the same kind of ballpark, right? So I kept on, talking to him, praying to Santa Muerte. Less than 36 hours later, I get an astonishing phone call from my brother. His truck, which the cops had told him was already in either a chop shop or in Mexico by now, was less than a mile and a half from his house in a Walmart parking lot, undamaged except for the steering column where they hot-wired it, with gas still in it. All of his tools were still in it. His paperwork, like all of his insurance paperwork that would be great to steal for identity theft, was still in it.
Awesome. That's amazing. Amazing. Well, that is fascinating that you use someone else's spirit and go to the graveyard. And you said someone else was doing magic there. So in New Mexico, what part of New Mexico do you live in?
I live in Albuquerque.
Okay. So is that
gets lost.
Is Albuquerque? I haven't been to New Mexico yet, but that's on my list. Is that something that's common there for people to be doing magic in graveyards? Would anyone think, like, what the heck she's doing if someone saw you, or you said you'd seen something like that? Are there a lot of people there that are pagan or do some kind of, rituals or into Santa Muerte? So this is not unusual in your area?
It wouldn't be too unusual. I do know several Santa Muerte practitioners locally, but they all tend to be independent and private. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of pagans and people who practice magic and witchcraft in general in Albuquerque and in New Mexico. Owing to the strong Santa Muerte element, Albuquerque is the largest city in New Mexico. It has about 1.5 million people, and the state only has about 2 million people, so that should give you an idea. And our city is, fortunately, it's a sanctuary city. I am happy with that idea. And because of that, there are a lot of folks who have come up from Mexico who are practitioners who would not want to find themselves in other places, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So the fringe dwellers that are all into this, right?
It's safe to be in Albuquerque. How about that?
Yeah.
So,
and what about your what about your job? Do the people at the hospital or your bosses or anything, do they know about it? Do they think, would that be a problem? Or because some people will think of it as a negative, right?
They will. I am, at this time, my bosses do know that I am a practicing pagan. They know about my book, for example. Mm-hmm. I do keep it private from my patients because I frankly don't want to make a lot of them uncomfortable. I mean, a lot of the folks I see are frankly elderly. They're Hispanic Catholic. Right. And like you said earlier, a lot of folks aren't into it in Mexico. And if you come walking in, I am a Santa Muerte cultist, they're going to have a problem, So let's not go there, right? Santa Muerte, go ahead.
They feel that, some of them feel that it's evil.
They do.
So can you dispel that? I mean, it's absolutely not, right? No element. And you can use anything for good or evil, any focus.
Santa Muerte is purely a reflection of the people that call upon her. So if you're a mean person who would normally do evil things and you have an avenue for doing it, you're going to do it, whether it's going to be Santa Muerte, the devil, Jesus, or what have you, okay? It's just intention is going to be intention, okay? If you have a good person and you're a nice person, and let me put it to you this way. People like to fear death, especially in our culture, and I really don't understand why. A lot of us believe that we're going to reincarnate, and a lot of us that don't believe in reincarnation are hoping we're going to go like heaven or something when we die, because we certainly don't want to go to the other place, right? So if we want to reincarnate and become spiritually more powerful and more elevated, more knowledgeable, we're going to have to die.
Right. So
therefore, death isn't a bad thing. Death isn't necessarily mean. Death isn't necessarily cruel. Death isn't necessarily destructive. And Santa Muerte is exactly that embodiment of that fact. She doesn't have to be cruel. She doesn't have to be destructive. If death wanted to kill somebody, death could just kill them, okay? But it doesn't. It watches our every step. As a matter of fact, I often invoke Santa Muerte before I go work. Like I told you earlier in this interview, I'm an ER nurse.
Yes.
I was at work. It was at night. And we had a lady who came in, this was a couple years ago, and her whole family had the stomach flu, basically, and hers got worse instead of better, and they decided to bring her to the ER because her stomach really hurt and she had really bad diarrhea. Not unusual. So they bring her back from triage, and the triage nurse tells me that she brought me a stomach flu back to my room, and I kind of nodded because I had 5 other patients, and I was playing with charts, and you understand, I wasn't being slow on my way in there, but I wasn't rushing and leaping over the top of the nurse's station either. The lady just had diarrhea, you know? So I go and I turn around, and I was just about ready to grab the IV caddy, and I got this really, really cold chill that just went by the side of my body. It was just like a goose walked over my grave, okay? And I remember, like, I went chalk white, and I sort of looked, and right by that lady's room, I saw a black figure walk right by it, and I knew it was Santa Muerte. And I was going to go into someone else's room first. No, I went straight into that lady's room, right? And I'm looking at her, and she looked sick, okay? You know, she, complaining about her belly hurting, all this. And I just looked at her, and I knew she was going to die. I just knew she was going to die. And I'm starting to panic. I'm thinking, airway, breathing. It wasn't her airway, it wasn't her breathing, because she's sitting there talking, complaining. Had to be her circulation. So I shoved her daughter out of the way, and I threw her on a bedside cardiac monitor, a simple one that just shows 3 beats. She was having a massive, massive heart attack.
Wow.
Right. The reason why her diarrhea hadn't slowed down was because she was actually going into slow cardiac shock, and her body was starting to shut down unused systems.
Oh, yes. So that releases it.
So, and her flu had thrown her into it, which is why it seemed like the stomach flu. And if I had treated it like just the stomach flu and didn't call a cath lab and get an EKG and call the cavalry, yeah, I would have gotten her lab work. Yeah, the doctor would have seen her in an hour. And then the daughter would have come out and said, hey, my mom's not responding and her lips are blue.
Right. But did you save her? Was she okay after that?
She survived. She got discharged and she lived. Oh. Why? Because I saw a black figure walk by her room.
Wow.
Black figure walked in there and not showed me.
So do you because if you're seeing, wow. Oh, my husband, I was like, I feel cold air, but it's my husband turned on the heat and the cold comes first. I was like, oh my God, that is so funny. It's like, Santa Muerte, are you here? So do you, if you're seeing things like that, it's like the third eye that's open. Do you work a lot with opening the third eye? Do you see other things? What other kind of, what other kind of things do you work with for spirituality to open your senses or psychic senses?
I often just like to do very, very simple meditation. Some folks get extraordinarily elaborate in their meditations, like having certain kinds of music or certain breathing patterns or, having to stand on their heads or other silly certain things. I believe very much in the separation of the conscious mind or the thinking mind from the working mind that actually does magic. So being able to actually shut off thought for a very, very long period of time I find to be very, very useful. In terms of magical initiation, one of my favorite people to work with is actually the purple aspect of Santa Muerte right there. I mentioned that Santa Muerte has 7 different colors. That is her most popular model, and those different colors govern different kinds of things that she does.
Purple. This one's purple.
That one's purple, exactly. The purple one governs magical insight and magical knowledge, spiritual insight and awareness. It also covers royal authority because wisdom and spiritual insight often are thought to confer that kind of royal nobility and, confer that kind of leadership. Santa Muerte I do hold in the position as a Lord of the World type figure. What I mean by that is that you'll see that there are some spiritual entities like Melektas or Baphomet that are considered to be in such a superlatively high position compared to other deities or spirits or other types of entities, that they have the ability to touch and affect absolutely everything in the order underneath it. And this idea actually isn't unusual. As a matter of fact, in very early versions of Genesis, right after God said, I am, the first thing he created was death, because death created the possibility of change. Okay? So it's not an unusual idea. It's certainly a very old idea. So petitioning Santa Muerte with a form of clarity and then asking her to guide me towards initiatory experiences, especially since I consider death to be the gateway to our initiatory experiences, I find to be the most effective way of gaining insight and magical power.
Awesome. Amazing. So this is so exciting that you turned this passion into a real, like your website. You guys, all of her links are below to her website and her book. And I love your website. You've got different articles, blogs on different aspects, and everything is around Santa Muerte, and you wrote the book. I mean, this is the kind of thing I love. You turn your passion into something that you can share with everyone. So you guys, leave some comments below. Are you familiar with Santa Muerte? Have you worked with Santa Muerte? Are you going to try it? Would love to hear your thoughts. All right, everybody, take care. Much love.